Hi, I'm KyuYoung Heo, and today I'm going to talk about the improved productivity with server-driven UI. So today I'm going to introduce about what the server-driven UI is, and then benefits, implementation, cost, consideration, case study, and conclusion. So this icon is a bit breaky, but so what is a server-driven UI? A server-driven UI is when server uh, send a response to client in JSON format, which has which define the UIs, and then client just rendering the UI based on the response. So it's just simple concept, and this following slide is the everything I'm gonna talk in this talk. Yeah, today, yeah. So this JSON is a example response. So on the left there is a VStack. Oh, sorry, I have to. I was a bit nervous. On the left side, there is a hello image and words, and it consists of the column on the outer side, which has a row and text word. In the and there is a text and image in a row. So this is one example of the server-driven UI. To make this UI in iOS with Swift UI code, you might be writing code like following this. There's a VStack, HStack, text, image, and text. In Android, when you use the Jetpack Compose, you might gonna write following code. It's really similar to the iOS because it's Jetpack. There is a column, row, text, image, and text again. So, yeah, and you can see it in the JSON and Swift UI and Compose. They have a similar structure because they all describe the UI in a predefined way. So there is one feature about the server-driven UI is that you apply changes on iOS and Android at the same time because, as all you know, that it depends on the response of server. So, I just want to introduce about the declarative UI because sharing UI rendering mechanism when using declarative UI in iOS and Android by Swift UI and Jetpack Compose. Because in declarative UI, you describe what to show, not how to show. And server describe what to draw in UI. So that's why if you are using a declarative UI, you can easily rendering the UI by the response. So today I'm gonna telling you guys about the server-driven UI. So, and there is 4 big benefits, I think. So first one is that you can apply changes in iOS and Android at the same time, as I mentioned. And then you can save resources by reusing the UI elements in a predefined way. You don't have to implement new pages each time. You just only have to rendering the JSON, that's all. But there is a little other cost too. And it makes app development cycle much faster. And because you don't have to waiting App Store review, you only have to change the response by the server. And finally, you can control previous versions UI by just changing that response. So in short, I'd like to say by using server-driven UI, it makes feedback cycle faster by trying new experiment. In other words, I'd like to say it make data-driven decision cycle much faster to make bigger business impact. Yeah, and this is all, and I'm gonna show you about the how to implement this server-driven UI. So how to rendering UI from JSON. There is just two elements. There's a type of image and type of text, which is a URL and hello world. In the first phase, you pass this JSON to array of dynamic scheme. Dynamic scheme. Dynamic scheme is just arbitrary type that I made. It represents this one element. And then the client builds this dynamic scheme because at this point, client doesn't know about UI. It doesn't know what to be drawn. It only see there's only JSON. So in this phase, dynamically build it as a meta type, like dynamic scheme. And when client builds this dynamic scheme, there is a property information in the raw. So in this phase, this can build it as a image scheme or text scheme, which wrapped by the meta type dynamic scheme. And then to rendering this type into UI, client have to unwrap. So it's easy to unwrap because there is a type information in this struct. And after unwrap this type, now client can rendering this as a UI, like this image with hello world text. I think, and the key of this dynamic scheme is, as all you know, in a Swift UI, there's a vstack, like hstack has a child. So there's a column scheme, which vstack in Swift UI, it has a recursive structure, like it has dynamic scheme as a children, and it also can have another dynamic scheme because it's a recursive structure. Yeah, I think I'm a bit messed up my talk. Yeah, so so when this so these phases can be described as following. First, passing JSON as array of dynamic scheme, and then convert dynamic scheme, which is meta type, to specific scheme type, like image scheme, text scheme, hstack, vstack, or whatever. And then you have to implement view that corresponding to specific scheme. I just only show the image and text, but when you have to, implement the UI view for that image and text. And finally, you have to implement the view rendering logic. So in today's talk, I will show this phase step by step with example project. Well, before that, I just want to say about more detail about those type. So dynamic scheme is, I mentioned it's kind of meta type, but it's actually protocol that represents as array in JSON. It has an ID and type, and those type has a text image or whatever. And there is a extension of array of when element is any dynamic scheme. It has a typed property which iterate itself and then cast into any dynamic scheme. And when the typecast is accessed, it iterates its type property. So basically, this property does the passing. No, this. Sorry, I will show this later in the project. Yeah. So this type property is a hold on. As you can see, this type property is actually the building the scheme from its any dynamic scheme. So it according to its type, this type property builds the row scheme, column scheme, text scheme, and so on from the JSON. Actually, I really want to introduce and compare the some and any type, but I think I have to skip this. Yeah, I mean, if you want to ask or talk about this slide, please talk me after the talk. And here's one example about the dynamic scheme, which is image scheme. The static function build scheme from is initialized by reading property from any dynamic scheme. Like in the right side, there's a JSON which has a image type and raw. It has a URL, width, and height. So in the static function, this initializes the image scheme from by the pass those properties. And the image scheme view is a UI element for rendering the image scheme. So it's just simple. It has a sync image which has a scheme's URL, and it setting each frame by as specified in the scheme. So so for example, when client receives the response like the left, it has a type of image, and then it pass its JSON into the any dynamic scheme. It has an ID and type of image, and it has a raw of JSON. And then the client unwrapped its any dynamic scheme to image scheme using the previous static function. And in this phase, the client has the ID, URL, width, and height of this image scheme. And then finally, the client rendering the image scheme view corresponding the image scheme. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you about the project. Now I thought that, no, whatever. So in this project, it has a project with two Swift package manager. Two packages. So one is the app logic, and the other is the dynamic render server. So this project has two schemes. The one is server, and the other is the iOS project. So now I'm gonna show you to change the UI just by the server's response. So you have to. Oh, will you?
Like that.
That's fine. Is it? Yeah, first run the server. I think it's listening. And then change scheme to the app. I guess it's for, no, I'm not sure. I think it takes time, maybe. Yeah, sometimes this happened. So. By waiting oh, it's working. So now the server is running, and when app is started, it gets response from the server that has a response about, oh, oh. It's now running, right? And when, oh, yeah, here it is. So, thank you. Thanks a lot. So, what this server does is just using this image scheme and text scheme, to make this as a column for children to image and text, and then return just this response. And now I'm gonna change the server response, and I will refresh the app again. So in the controller, when I comment it out and run server again, and now this page is gonna change by not by just rerun or rebuild, only the refresh. So you can see this scroll, this awesome view, and it's when you change the response and refresh again, it's gonna change it. So and that's all. So so I show you about how this project worked. And I just want to say that the server-driven UI is not like a silver bullet. It has a cost, and you have to carefully consider about this cost, because it looks simple, but you have to implement UI rendering framework, both in iOS and Android. And I think for applying this server-driven UI to your team, you might need define design system first, because in a production level, the UI gonna be much more complicated. Like there's far more UI components, and there's so many font style or whatever. So to using this on your production app, it's better to having a design system before the introducing server-driven UI. And last, you have to consider the performance optimization, because I guess the first simpler response JSON, that response size is about like 100 kilobytes. And it's gonna be much larger in a production level. And we have to consider about the rendering performance, because it might be takes much longer time for drawing too many UI elements in one pages. Like it have to pause, build, and unwrap, and then render. So there is a cost about server-driven UI. Oh, yeah. So first, UI rendering framework. I just show you the very simple and static view, but if you want more flexible UI, it requires more sophisticated framework. So for example, you have to define the font family, size, alignment, line height, and whatever in text, only in one text component. And you have to define and implement the URL, width, height, corner radius, alignment, and action when you want to like show the image. And yeah, and design and I already mentioned about the design system because iOS and Android, those clients are depend on the predefined response, which just represent the design system. So for the so server and client are dependent on protocol that defined by design system. So it's better to having this system. And I told that it's not a silver bullet. It has a I'd like to say challenge is not the problem because you have to have a well-defined design system. And I was struggle about implement the stateful UI components like button or toggle or read unread that red dot. And if you want to implement the side effect like a routing to other pages or routing to the external app, it might be tricky to implement. And also it depends on the server's response. You have to consider what to do when the app is offline. Like you might consider the caching the previous response, but what if the first launching app is offline, or what if the previous response is invalid, or so on. And last, you have to consider about the force update policy because in server-driven UI, you don't publish the new app version. So, for example, I want to add a new styles of button, but the iOS app doesn't know about the button, and it doesn't have code about that specific new UI component. Then you have to consider the force update. Yeah, and as many of you might thinking, then what we should use server-driven UI, not a web view, because so in this page I'm gonna talk about its benefit compared to web view, because so this is a good thing of web view because web view also shows UI dynamically. And it doesn't need the rendering system or parsing logic or design system. And WebView might be the suitable solution for some team. But I insist that server-driven UI's benefit is when you have to, using the WebView, you have to create a new front-end project and you have to writing the business logic to that project. So you have to consider the cost for managing new front-end project and code fragmentation. And different from WebView in server-driven UI, it's easy to extend native feature like a stateful page or side effect handling. And the last one, I think it's not a good way to call functions between WebView and iOS. The first one, WebView.evaluate JavaScript, is when in iOS side, this function calls the JavaScript function in iOS, and second one, webview.message handlers.callback.post message name. This function is calling iOS function in WebView side. So I think it's better to using Swift UI, better to using server-driven UI when you have to calling the functions and handling those native features. So finally, you have to carefully consider, like if your team already has design system and you run the service in a data-driven way, and you want to experiment quickly and change pages frequently, and for those teams, server-driven UI might be improve productivity. So I guess I said a lot of costs and challenges about server-driven UI, but still many teams and companies are using server-driven UI a lot. So from now, I'm gonna show you the benefits and how the other companies using this technology on their production app. So I'm gonna talk about Toast, Airbnb, Naver, KyuYoung Heo, and Delivery Hero. So this is a Toast design system like TDS on their in a Toast/2021. They are showing the UI layout with this YML maybe. So they are using this design system according to the whole project in iOS, Android, and front end. So they use in very similar way. There's a linear layout to those vertical layout, and those response are rendered as this UI. And Toast is well known for frequently experiment their new feature and doing their A/B testing and so on. So I think it's a good choice to using server-driven UI in Toast. Yeah. So on their system, they use a UI component with those configuration function or something. They have a left image and center text 1, 2, and right checkbox type. And and this is one example. And the Airbnb's case is well known in iOS server-driven UI system. They use a Ghost platform. Yeah, they named it as a Ghost platform, but they are using this technology in this way. So in a second and the third picture, you can see there is a sections like a navigation, main, and footer. And in the main section, they split it into a hero, title, home details, and description. So Airbnbs are using this server-driven UI not in a very small UI component-wise way. They're using a much bigger way with divided by the section. And this is a Naver search platform's case. When you type the Gyeongju 불국사 on Naver, you can see that there is a different UI according to your keyword. They predefine those keywords into a specific UI, and you can see the component section. They use basic info and carousel square basic to drawing this UI dynamically. Yeah, so Naver are using this as a similar way to Airbnb because they they drawing it as a section, whole section, not as one text or images. And finally, I want to share the KyuYoung Heo's case study because in a delivery app, they use a lot of testing and data analytics. Like in a Christmas Eve, they want to prove that the users are delivering like cakes or chickens a lot more, a lot better, a lot, yeah, than the normal days. So they are dynamically compose those component order, and in those feature category component, they said that they are changing those labels and buttons in different way in a specific event to prove their hypothesis. Yes, and this is a delivery heroes example, and it's really similar to the Naver and Airbnb. So today's conclusion, I want to say, if you're using a server-driven UI based on design system, then you can have a DSL, domain-specific language, for your UI, and you can enable those four main things like A/B testing, event tracking, testing, and you can enhance the workflow. So by using server-driven UI, you can have much more bigger business impact by improve the productivity of your team. And this is Amazon's flywheel, like starting from the server-driven UI, starting from the declarative UI, your team gonna have a design system, then you can able to use server-driven UI, and it makes your deployment much faster. It makes early feedback, and this whole cycle make your team's productivity much better than the previous way. Yeah, so these are the references that I used on this talk, and it's done. Thank you for listening my presentation.
Thank you. So any questions?
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
I have a wondering about the SDUI. In clean architecture, drawing UI components is handled on the presentation layer, right?
Yeah.
But the SDUI, the drawing responsibility is on the external layer.
You mean the server's response, right?
Yep, the server is the external layer. So in this aspect, the external layer knows the presentation layer, and so that the direction of the dependency is inverted, and the coupling will be increased. How do you think like that?
Oh, yeah, you're right. So in this server-driven UI, iOS and Android's rendering framework depends on the server's response.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. So you have to carefully consider the predefined design system, because one small change in design system makes impacts to client-side rendering framework. So I've applied server-driven UI in my app. It was like commerce platform. So we did not put everything everywhere, the server-driven UI, the whole app. We only choose the specific range which expected to be changed frequently, and which are not gonna be added new UI component a lot. So as you said, the presentation layer depends on the external. That's right. So you have to carefully consider the cost between the benefit.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Is there any other questions?
This question was hard because when we watched your demo, you were not using twist. So I think that's why you had a hard question. What?
Yeah.
Which? Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I have one question. As a front-end developer, I was wondering about attaching event listener. Like it's kind of you click up, you push a button, and there is a kind of function you can execute But I think when using server-driven UI system, there is no way for JSON to attach function or send function kind of, because JSON is, yeah. So how do you think about kind of attaching a function to a server-driven UI component?
So you mean consider about the like button which has a attached or which has an action. Yeah. So in my production app, it has a much more UI component. The one of the components is a button which has action. But as I said before, it depends on the design system. So for implement a button, you have to define the cases of action. Like this button is for like a show alert. This button is for to open external Safari view. So when you define those types of events in advance before the server-driven UI, it can be using the features like you mentioned.
I have a further question.
Yeah, please.
Is there any way to combine your server-driven UI with client-side Swift code, Swift functions? So,
Sorry, I didn't get it.
is there any way to combine your server-driven UI component with the client-side Swift function?
Oh yeah, when it comes to defined before the get a response. Yeah. So if there is a like new unexpected event from the response, you cannot handle those events. So that's why you have to carefully choose this feature.
Thank you.
All right.
Good stuff. This is actually quite close to my heart because I've worked on a framework that did all of this 8 years ago. And also for the button you mentioned, because I think the solution you mentioned is have specific buttons for different use cases. You don't need them if you use Objective-C to call functions, because with Objective-C, you can dynamically call functions by the string name. So you could literally just have an action name in the JSON, and then just define a function in Swift and mark it at Objective-C, and then call it using the Objective-C runtime dynamically, just by the name you got from the JSON. Then you could just have one button component that does all the buttons, because you can call any function. You just have to define it somewhere in code.
Yeah. So, was it called like KVO or
No, that's KeyValue. No, it's not. It's something else.
Not like that.
What was it? I forgot. But you can search. It's basically you call an Objective-C function. That's where you gotta tag it when you write the Swift function. You gotta add Objective-C in the front. But it enables you, because we all know Swift doesn't support like dynamic stuff like Objective-C did. But if you use Objective-C for this specific case, you can literally call a function using a string name, and that string can be basically from a JSON, right? And because so you can basically, when you create your JSON, you can be button and then action name and just a name of the function, and then in your code, that code will dynamically link and call that function. So you can have one button component that does all the buttons. So because that's how we did it. Because we had literally same concept. You get a JSON down. Definitely, you gotta be careful to have locally stored JSON, because we've seen a lot of apps rejected if you can update. It's not a problem when you have a small use case for server-driven UI, like you showed like a home page or explore page. That's fine because you're changing content. But when your whole app, because ours was a framework that covers everything, the whole app you did in JSON, everything, tabs, actions, log in, log out, everything. So in that case, you need to have the JSON in your binary when you submit to Apple because it's actually changing functionality, meaning that you could submit a calculator app. Apple is like, great. And then you change on your server and now it's some illegal app, right? Apple doesn't like that. So you gotta be careful in that case just to actually have it and the actual JSON in there. But yeah, good stuff. It's interesting to see that something that I've done so many years back, it's kind of getting a comeback. But yeah, it's good.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we need to have some chat after.
Yeah. I'm linked to and thanks for the commenting. And I'm really surprised that your app, like the whole app, like the tabs and every things are
We
made
even
by.
had so how we had iOS and Android, and basically the designer had a UI interface on the web. So he literally dragged the icons on his web interface.
Oh.
He put everything there, vStacks, buttons and stuff. And then I just did refresh. So if he was like, oh, I want to change this text, he on his editor, he changed it up there, changed the font. I clicked refresh and it updated instantly because we had the web interface to edit the UI. And then I was just focusing on logic. I had to, of course, write the functions, right? So then I was like, okay, this function is going to be called login. And then he had to type login. So I was focusing on the logic part, the business logic, while the designer basically just kind of like in Figma, he just put the components in, click, this is button, this action to this screen, and our framework automatically pulled that huge JSON, which you mentioned that is quite big. And I've also used Vapor a lot. So you should probably enable broadly compression for that when you enable it. Yeah, because it will be really tiny when you enable that.
Yeah.
But I'll stop that.
Interesting, yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions? But that was a good point because I had that question regarding Apple review. Because as you said, you could submit something, but just after submission, give everything else. And I'm still not sure what you meant by you have to have the JSON because you can have the JSON of the calculator and later just something else.
Also disable the refresh.
Sorry?
You gotta disable refresh. So you cannot just. So what we have to do to have the app approved is have the JSON.
Have the JSON in your project, right? The latest JSON, and then we have to hide the refresh button because otherwise Apple didn't like having that refresh up there, and they did reject quite a few times saying, because they look at your code as well, they can see and they're like, you don't use much UI components. Like, where's your layout defined? Like, they see the framework has all the UI components, but in the app it's like, there's nothing, So you gotta kind of find the balance there. And I think if you just use it for content, like I said, it's fine. When you have the whole app using this, you're gonna have to be careful when you refresh and when you disable that. And usually the easiest is that you just hide the button. Maybe you have your own kind of endpoint or something, or maybe a push notification, like a silent push notification can trigger like a server-driven UI update, so you can kind of fix some typos, right? But you definitely don't want to make big UI changes or like functionality. You can rearrange, but don't add functionality because if you get on the Apple, naughty list, you're gonna have problems submitting apps.
Yeah, there are guidelines asked about that.
Yeah.
One more things I want to add is, so I've been using this technique. Maybe it was 5 years ago. We were working on an app for kind of like Meetup, meetup.com, and I found that I was very excited because in our app we had a feature that was community driven, meaning that the people could write articles. And when you have this kind of feature, so people, they have on their app or on the web or even our administrators, they had like Clement said, an interface where they can add an image, add a title, like same with Medium. You have like a couple of components you can use, and then I was writing this logic to have like, okay, so they can mix and match. Have two titles, have this image, have this paragraph. So having this kind of server-driven logic. So I think that was a good use case of where to implement it. I don't think you have other options actually for this kind of use case, like bloggings, articles. So I think there is the vast majority of teams, they use these and services, they use it for, they just have the section pre-made, and they basically they want to change the order of some things. This is mostly where people, like a lot of the percentage of people using server-driven UI is for this use case. They already have the section or the component developed, and then it's more or less where to put them on the screen. That's what we did, and I was very excited about this. So I started to, wanting to do more with this. But then displaying content is fine, but when you start to actually have responsive content, like you said, like buttons and so on, I think the complexity of things is, if you want to cover everything, it's so hard and it takes so much time. So I don't think you really need to be sure that that's what you want to do. And when we did it, it was in UI Kit. So then when SwiftUI was introduced, I was like, oh, this is even better because the UI framework is predisposed to be used. Like it's better to use these techniques and be way easier. So it's funny because when I started this meetup, when we were like 3-4 people at the coffee shop, I was talking about this. I was talking like it's technically possible to be able to like build a framework to actually control everything from a JSON. Do you want, like pretty much like Clement was talking about, do you want to do this? Maybe not, especially if like Apple will not be happy, but I was like talking with people about this idea and actually providing a client where people can drag and drop and build their app. Like you can find, for example, with Tailwind, like if you are front-end web, you have a lot of tools where you can do this, maybe Flutter Flow, something like this. And the possibility to do it in iOS as well, but it's way more complicated than it looks. Like the displaying is fine, but when you have interaction and then, so maybe if you have a specific set of simple use cases, it's fine, but it can be complicated, like very quick. Any other questions or comment, feedback?
It was my first time to know about these kind of things because I'm backend engineer, and as backend engineer, I'm not that happy that I have to control everything.
Fair enough.
And makes me feel like it costs more communication between front end and backend, because backend decides everything about front end. So it looks like it's not that resistant to change. But if it's for some specific content things, it would be fine. But haven't you ever experienced any miscommunication with backend and have some kind of trouble? How did you deal with that?
Oh, yeah. And thank you for mentioning thank you for asking as a backend developer, because when I was introducing my previous team, actually, it looks like a iOS developer doesn't have to do much things, but that means that the backend developer have to writing UI layout code much more. Yeah, so it makes my backend developer has much more burden to do a lot of things. So what I decided to do is I wrote the backend code, but not in a but not as reading database and processing those logic, just only the writing UI layout logic, because it's just as same as writing Swift UI code. when it comes to writing UI layout code in like Java or Node.js. So I'd like to show the server code in my example project. So there's a controller and there's a scheme builder which just builds this layout. So it's just as simple. I mean, when the backend developer are working on the business logic, and then I'm just writing this zip and map and those text schemes and composing it as a row and then compose it as a column and then just return this response to this controller. So yeah, there wasn't any miscommunication because I wrote the backend code, but before that, before the planning phase, we talk a lot to each other. I mean, there was a iOS and backend, and of course there was a designer at the first time because designer they plan how to draw a new page, and after designer done, I worked on those UI in a like backend code. And then when backend developer finish their business logic and just merge and deploy, and in iOS app side there are not much things to do. Yeah. So was it enough for your question? Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, please.
Like, you could probably, instead of having the schemas and this builder, it just doesn't feel fun, you could probably use the layout protocol that SwiftUI has that enables you to inspect what's in the layout. So I imagine that if you use that and have it as a, like, you know, as a root view and then all your views inside, just SwiftUI views, in the layout view, you could probably read what's inside and how it's laid out and generate the JSON out of that.
Oh.
So you could probably write the SwiftUI code that generates the JSON that then you can use on iOS and Android. Because then it makes it more fun. It's like text to VStack. It's you know, it's a bit nicer than this.
Better than writing.
Yeah. Or I mean, you could write your own custom DSL and then. But if you could just, you know, use the layout protocol and inspect what's inside, then it's much easier because you don't have to write all the views. You can just see what's inside and just hand, oh, it's an image view, do this, oh, it's a text, do this, generate JSON, throw out, done. And just an idea. It could be fun to do.
Interesting, because on your way, you can, we don't have to imagine what to be drawn just by looking at just
Yeah,
escape.
and you could also use the SwiftUI previews.
Yeah, right.
To, when you do it, you can just use SwiftUI preview to do it, then get the JSON out, use that on the server, and you have it done on Android as well. Maybe?
Yeah,
Maybe.
that makes sense. Yeah. And there's one more thing I want to just show to you guys, because you mentioned that the UI code will be just simple. So I want to show that on this example project, this is the everything on each UI layer. Like as you mentioned, there's only button and there's only dynamic renderer component with nested with scroll view. So like you mentioned, maybe Apple might be not happy when they see this code on app. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.